Welcome back. Let's discuss alcohols. Remember, in this tutorial, we're just introducing alcohols. We're going to discuss the chemical reactions of alcohols in detail, and then we're going to discuss also the physical properties and also the naming of alcohols in detail later. In this lesson, we're just introducing alcohols. An alcohol is an organic compound that contains one or more hydroxyl group. The first three alcohols are these ones. We have methanol. Methanol, remember from the prefix meth, meaning that we have one carbon there. So the structural formula of methanol will be like this, where we have one hydrogen replaced by a hydroxyl group. Methanol is mixed with ethanol to form methylated spirit. It is a poisonous alcohol, remember that, and can lead to blindness or death. So methanol is poisonous. And then the next one is ethanol, from the prefix eth, meaning that we have two carbons. Then the structural formula for ethanol will be this one, where one hydrogen is replaced by a hydroxyl group. Ethanol is used a lot in alcoholic beverages, but in small concentrations. It is used as a solvent, can be used as an antiseptic, a disinfectant. There are many other uses of alcohols. I cannot mention all of them here. Propanol, we can have propan 1-ol. We're going to discuss this a lot when we're doing what? When we're doing naming of alcohols. 1-ol because the hydroxyl group is bonded to the first carbon. We number our couples like this, like 1, 2, 3. You can also name them 1, 2, 3, like that. And then you take the smallest number. Here we'll take the 1 instead of the 3. So it means this is carbon 1. That's why we have 1 here, because the hydroxyl group is bonded to carbon 1. And then we can have propan 2-ol. Now in this case, the hydroxyl group is bonded to the second carbon. 1, 2, 3. Even if you go this way, it's still the second carbon. So that's why you have propan 2-ol. And then propanol is used mainly as an antiseptic or disinfectant in hospitals and clinics. Remember, we say that the general formula for alkanes, we had Cn, then H2n, then plus 2. So if we have one hydrogen being replaced by the hydroxyl group, then we remain Cn, H2, and then plus 1, because one hydrogen is replaced by the OH group, then we have the OH group there. This is the general formula for alcohols where we have one hydroxyl group. The suffix in the naming we use "ol", that's why we have methanol, butanol, propanol, ethanol, etc. Alcohols are polar molecules. I'll explain this one later. Also, there are hydrogen bonds between alcohol molecules. I'll also explain this one later. Alcohols are polar molecules. What do you mean by that? They form dipoles. We have a side which is partially negative, and then we have a side which is partially positive. Why this side is negative? It is because of the oxygen. Oxygen is highly electronegative, so it attracts electrons towards itself. So this side becomes partially negative, and then this side becomes partially positive. So that's why we have a dipole. So because of this, alcohols are what? Are polar molecules. And then because of the presence of oxygen here, and the next molecule of alcohol having a hydrogen like this, right? One of the intermolecular forces between the alcohol molecules is the hydrogen bonding, okay, which is very strong compared to other intermolecular forces. So this also influences the physical properties of alcohols. We're going to discuss this later. But I want us to discuss primary, secondary, and tertiary carbons before we look at the different types of alcohols. We have primary alcohols, we have secondary alcohols, we have tertiary alcohols. This will depend on which carbon the hydroxyl group is attached. So let's try to find out what is a primary carbon. A primary carbon is attached to only one other carbon atom. Try to identify here primary carbons or primary carbon. A carbon atom that is attached to only one other carbon. Right, if you check, we have this carbon. It is only attached to this carbon. So this is a primary carbon. It is attached to one other carbon. Do we have any other here in this molecule? We also have this carbon. It is attached to one other carbon like this. So this is also a primary carbon. So now if we have a hydroxyl group attached to a primary carbon, then that alcohol is what? Is a primary alcohol. But let's talk about secondary carbons. A secondary carbon is attached to two other carbon atoms. Which one will be the secondary carbon here? It will be this one. You see, it is attached to two other carbons. So if we have a hydroxyl group attached to this carbon, then that alcohol is called the secondary carbon. And then we have the tertiary carbon. A tertiary carbon is attached to three other carbon atoms. Like we have this carbon here. It is attached to three other carbon atoms. So this is a tertiary carbon. If we have a hydroxyl group attached to this carbon, then the alcohol is called the tertiary alcohol. So we say that in primary alcohols, the hydroxyl group is bonded to a primary carbon. Like these two here. We have hydroxyl groups bonded to the primary carbons. It's called butane 1-ol, right? This carbon is a primary carbon because it is attached to one other carbon. This one also is a primary carbon because it is attached to one other carbon. So since the hydroxyl groups are attached to this primary carbon, then this alcohol is called the primary alcohol. And then secondary alcohols, that's where we have the hydroxyl group attached to a secondary carbon like this. So this carbon is attached to two other carbons. So this is a secondary carbon. Since the hydroxyl group is attached to this carbon, then this is a secondary alcohol. And then we have the tertiary alcohols. This carbon is a tertiary carbon because it is attached to three other carbons. And then since the hydroxyl group is attached to this carbon, which is tertiary carbon, then the alcohol is what? Is a tertiary alcohol. Right, these are some of the uses of alcohols. Like I mentioned, methylated spirit is a mixture of ethanol and methanol. Ethanol is used in low concentrations in alcoholic drinks or alcoholic beverages. Then they are used as industrial solvents, and then they are used also as solvents in pharmaceuticals. Those are medicines, perfumes, and other things. And then they are also used as antiseptics or disinfectants, especially in hospitals. And then also ethanol is a good fuel. So alcohols also can be used as fuels. So we'll discuss more about these alcohols in the next lessons. In this lesson, we're just introducing this homologous series.